You have emergency 911 with the address of the emergency. I need emergency. My husband is dying. My husband is dying. Come 911 now, please. My baby's not breathing. Okay, now, are you with him right now? He's not breathing at all. We all are with him. Oh, please, there's somebody. He's dead.
Welcome back to the AEMT lecture series. Mike Morris, and happy to have you back. Chapter 7. So I will not be releasing all the lectures for chapter 7 because there's too many to put in one video. So this will be the first lecture of chapter 7 of this chapter. So we are planning on starting back April the 9th. That could change with the crisis that we're in, but that's the date that I was given when this first went down. But it's always a possibility that could change. So hopefully it won't. You know, I'm anxious to get started back. I'm sure you are too. But you know, what do you do? So I hope everybody's out there is doing well. I hope that you guys are trying to isolate yourself as much as you can, washing your hands, doing all that stuff that's important, so we don't spread this stuff. If anybody out there's had an exposure, I'm sorry. I'm in the same boat with you, but we just got to get through it. So chapter 7, and so we open up chapter 7 by talking about the cell. Now, this is different than what you had in EMT school, because we're going to go a little deeper into the cell. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting. And you may ask, why is it important, you know, as an EMS provider to understand the anatomy and physiology of a cell? And it's just quite simple. It's the cell is the basic building block of life, and that's why we need to be able to understand it. Now, we don't have to have a biology degree, but we need to be able to picture in our head when something's going down. We need to understand the cost of that, meaning you have a patient who is knocking on the door of respiratory failure. So when you're looking at that patient and you're assessing the patient and you're looking for signs of respiratory failure, you need to understand what the cost is if we don't do something to either prevent failure or to not treat failure. And that's you know what, that's what this chapter I think is about. They give you a lot of information about the cell, and they give you just enough information to make you question a lot of other things. So I've got a lot of stuff in this, a lot of information. It might take you a little bit further than this chapter. I'm definitely not trying to go too far myself, because I don't want to, you know, we don't need to. We need to understand the cell. We need to understand what the curriculum, the national curriculum, wants us to understand, so that, you know, we can pass the registry exam at the end of the class. But I want the questions also to be answered, and so that's how I kind of put this first part together. So let's take a look at it. I just mentioned the cell being the building block. And so there's a theory behind cells, right? And so that theory is that all cells are descendants of a single cell. And so, and you know, makes sense in a way, because when the sperm meets the egg, that's a single cell. And now that cell's going to grow, right? And when it gets to a certain size, it's going to divide. And we're going to have two new cells. And so we're going to talk about how that happens. We're going to talk about how that kind of happens. We're gonna well, before I get too far, so what is the cell's job? Well, to start with, when we're talking about a cell, we could be talking about any kind of cell, and there's many different types of cells. So you have cardiac cells, you have skin cells, you have respiratory cells, you have tissue cells. Well, that's kind of the same, but you get my drift, right? The cells, all of these cells, they have their own special thing about them. They have their own special responsibility. And so depending on what type of cell it is, depends on what its requirement is to maintain something called homeostasis. Now, homeostasis, simply put, is keeping the body in check. You could say a temperature of 98.2 would be normal. Well, that's homeostasis. Now, some folks are going to be normal at 98.6, and some folks are going to be normal at 97.7. But that is the body's, the cell's responsibility is to keep us in the normal range. And in order to achieve that, it has to do a couple things. One, it has to divide. It has to grow and it has to divide, okay? Or it has to grow and reproduce. And the second thing that it has to do, it has to communicate. Okay, it's going to communicate with other cells to make this possible. Now, let me remind you that a single cell, it grows, right? And so it's going to grow, and it's going to make tissue, and then tissue makes organs. Organs make organs, multiple organs make organ systems, right? And then us being the organism. So that single cell, it's an important factor. And going back to the cost, I think about it when I'm assessing a patient. I think about, okay, I'm losing cells right now. What can I do to stop that? Because if you can look at things, so people, some people look at things like, how can I stop the suffering? Okay, I get that. I understand that. How you could see somebody suffer, but some people may not get that from seeing people suffer. So it's like if you have $5 in your wallet and somebody comes and takes it, well, you could put a value with that. You're like, man, that guy just took $5 from me. Well, the same thing for cells and understanding them is there's a cost. What other things cells do? And so a cell has to get nutrients, right? It has to get some O2, has to get rid of waste. Some of that waste is also CO2, right? So we'll talk more about that as we continue. So get you a cup of coffee, sit back, relax, and just kind of listen to it, take some notes. That's the beauty behind online, right? Is that you can pause it. You can not rewind. I've said that like twice since doing this. You can back it up. So yeah, I do like that. Cell structure. So your book says there's two general types. It says sex cells and somatic body cells, and so that's the cells that we're talking about really in this chapter's the body cells, and they're called your eukaryotic. I cannot believe I can't remember. Eukaryotic cells, all kinds of different prokaryotic cells. I mean, so they have different meanings, but they generally mean the same thing. So I don't get hung up on the names. All right, so the cell, when we're learning about it, we kind of put it in three different parts, right? So the first part would be the cell membrane, and we're going to go into that later. But just to introduce you to the cell membrane, it forms the cell's outer surface, okay? And so it does that. It forms that outer surface, and it separates the cell from extracellular versus intracellular fluid. Okay, so it does that. It's selective, meaning it lets some things inside the cell and some things don't get in the cell. It lets some things out of the cell and some things it holds back. So it's selective about what it lets in and out. And then, of course, it can communicate, and so it can communicate through chemical signals, and so it allows those signals to be transmitted and received. That's number one. Number two, we're going to talk about the cytoplasm. So it consists of the contents, cellular contents, right, between the plasma membrane and the nucleus. Okay. We're going to break it down and call, so inside the cytoplasm, we have cytosol. Okay, so it's an intracellular fluid. And then inside that lives the organelles, okay, within the cytosol. So in each organelle, we're going to go through them. They'll have a special function. And who would have thought that there would be so much inside the cell? I mean, who would have thought? And then last but certainly not least is the nucleus. And that's going to house most of your all, I guess, of your DNA. Okay. And so we're going to talk about DNA a little bit, not much. And that contains, in the DNA, contains chromosomes. So it's like a single molecule of DNA associated with hereditary units called genes. So, and if you just think, though, there's people who spend their whole career, their whole calling in life, studying either 1, 2, or 3. That, you know, they're either in the nucleus, right, or they're in the cytoplasm, or they're talking about the membrane. All three of those, you get a general knowledge in college, you get a degree, and but if you work for a research lab or you do something in biology, you may just be in the nucleus and you never ever deal with anything else. So it's pretty neat. Okay, so this is this slide, it's good, we're going to repeat ourselves a little bit, but we have to kind of repeat ourselves a little bit because I want you to kind of get it. So sometimes I do repeat myself, and I don't do it on purpose. I actually do it to try to maybe show you a different picture or a new thought or idea. So let's look at this here. Let's look at this plasma membrane up here. So if instead of the circle that you have in your head, right, this is like more of a square. So here's your plasma membrane. Okay. Here's your plasma membrane, and you're going to find out that it has two lipid layers. Okay, we'll get into that here shortly. Here's your cytoplasm, right? And that's just it just says it's a general term for the material located between the plasma membrane and the membrane surrounding the nucleus. And then we're going to break that down, subdivide it into the cytosol, okay, which is nothing more than the fluid component, okay. It can also be called the intracellular fluid. And then we have the organelles that we talked about, and those are, all of these have special, they're all different structures with special jobs. I don't care if you know the difference between non-membranous and a membrane organelles. Doesn't matter. We're not getting that deep into it, but that's how that breaks down. All right, and so we talk about the cytoplasm one more time. Okay, so here's all of your organelles. Here's all your organelles that we're going to talk about. And inside these, around these organelles, is the cytoplasm, fluid-like material. and the cytosol is the fluid portion of the cytoplasm. Centrosomes. Okay, so here we have the area, right? So the centrosome is nothing more than the area of the centrioles. Whoops. Okay. So the centrosome is the area of these guys right here. These guys are like they're microtubules, and they're like little straws. Okay. And so their job is movement of the DNA right here in the nucleus. Okay, just outside the nucleus. They help to move it around. So that's what they do. Cilia. Okay, and then we have flagella. So we have two of these guys are basically the same, meaning they're hair-like, anchored just beneath the cell membrane. So right here's your membrane, right? And it's these guys right here, and so they're anchored just beneath. All right, they're just beneath the membrane, and so they're found though on the cell lining portions of your respiratory tract. So these guys help to move. These guys help to move. I'm sorry, just making sure I'm recording here. I am. Okay, good. These guys help to move like respiratory system particles and stuff out of the lungs. So that's what their job is in the lungs. Now, remember, these cells may have cilia used for something else in a different, part of the body, right? I'm just not aware of any other function that I can think of. Now the flagella, I said it's a little bit longer, right? And so the one place that I am aware of that you can find that is the tail of the sperm. It's longer, and so it's motile, and so you could consider that like a flagella. Ribosomes. So yeah. All right, so ribosomes. So these guys are particles, and they're composed of proteins and RNA molecules. So RNA molecules, really RNA, right? It's like a carbon copy of DNA. That's what it does. It helps when that cell splits, and we're going to talk about it. It's going to make a daughter cell. So it's going to make two cells out of one cell. And that DNA has to be copied and reproduced in each of those cells. And so in order for it to be copied, RNA is like the copy. So its function is to synthesize proteins. So when we talk about synthesize, right, we're talking about making something, right? We're going to make something new. And so that's what synthesize means. So that's what we're talking about here. Don't let the words fool you. It's just talking about making proteins or new proteins. And so you'll see them here. And what happens is these ribosomes, I just circled it. See these? They're going to attach to the endoplasmic reticulum, and it's going to be called something else. We'll get there, okay? But yeah, so that's where they're at. They're either floating in there or they're attaching to the endoplasmic reticulum, and that makes that called rough endoplasmic. But we'll get there in a second. It's all good. We'll get there in just a second. And we're there now, I think. All right, so the endoplasmic reticulum. I like saying that. So look, the structure, right? So it's a complex of interconnected membranes, okay? And it's bounded by sacs and canals. Okay, so that's what, let's see here. See these folds right here? That's what it's talking about, okay? So they're just like canals, and you can kind of see that's like a canal. It's kind of going through there. That's how things travel. Okay? That's how they travel. And so their function then is to transport material within the cell. That's one. But it also provides an attachment point for those ribosomes, right? And they're able to synthesize lipids. Okay? They're able to make something different out of the lipids. So pretty neat so far. So, but this endoplasmic reticulum, we're gonna break that down into two pieces. All right, so we're gonna call that smooth endoplasmic reticulum and rough endoplasmic reticulum. I just like to simply call it smooth ER or rough ER, just to make it shorter. Save some words a little bit. All right, so, but they have two different functions, okay? So the smooth, right, it's going to synthesize the lipids. It also is responsible for metabolism. All right, so the sum of a chemical reaction, all right, is what metabolism means. It provides energy, right? So it metabolizes carbohydrates. So it metabolizes, meaning involved in a chemical reaction, and carbohydrates provide energy. There you go. Detox of drugs and poisons. And so, with that being the case, a detox, I'm thinking the liver, and I wouldn't be wrong. So we'll find a lot of these cells doing some work there inside the liver, because that's what they do. They're a good detox, but they also are good storage of calcium. Then we have the rough ER. Okay, so it's going to secrete proteins, all right, produced by those ribosomes, because that's what ribosomes do, right? They make proteins, and so it's also they call it the membrane factory of the cell, right? And so what they mean is the membrane of the cell, sometimes it gets damaged and needs to be replaced, and so that's what happens here inside the rough ER. It works to keep its own membrane healthy, so that the wrong things don't get into it. All right, the Golgi apparatus, or the Golgi. I don't know how. I think you're pronounced. I think you're supposed to pronounce it the Golgi. But anyway, so what does this guy do, and where is he? So I think I got a picture of it somewhere. Let me back up so we can find a picture of this Golgi apparatus. There it is. Yep, right there. So it's right here. My pen will just work for me. All right, you see this right here? All right, so here it is. It's the Golgi apparatus. All right, so it's a warehouse for receiving, sorting, shipping, and some manufacturing, okay, of proteins, right? Proteins in this area are modified and they're stored, and then they're sent to other destinations. Remember when I said the cell has to communicate, right? It's communicating its needs. So if it has a need for something, the warehouse here inside the Golgi apparatus has that part that it needs, has that protein that it needs, and sends it out from there. It produces a large variety of carbohydrates, so we know then that it's producing some energy there as well. Lysosomes. Yeah, so these guys right here are pretty cool. They're basically there as the immune system of the cell. Okay, and they're filled with digestive enzymes. And the reason why they're digestive enzymes, right? Let me see. So see this guy right here? All right, so this guy right here, if he detected this cell right here, which is just another lysosome, but if it detected this as a different, like an intruder, right? Then what it does is it goes over here and it puts like a chemical mark on it. And then another one of these guys will come along and just eat it. They'll just eat it, right? And so it gets rid of it. That's how they do it. So they digest worn out organelles. All right, they destroy harmful bacteria, toxins, and viruses. Pretty cool. Somebody's got to take care of everything inside. Somebody's got to be like the regulator. All right, so microfilaments. Here we have some microfilaments right here. And we got some ribosomes too. These ribosomes are traveling through these microfilaments. So they're located in bundles beneath the plasma membrane. All right, and so they're present in most cells, best in your skeletal, cardiac, muscle cells. And so they're there, excuse me, to provide the strength and to alter cell shape. Should that cell need to go through something or pass through something, needs to maybe change its shape around a little bit to make that happen, these guys can do it. So they're also, since I mentioned, cardiac cells and skeletal cells, yeah, they're going to be used for contraction. So yeah, that's skeletal cells, like your muscles. You pick up something, grab something, or your heart's beating. That's what these guys do good at. And then we have vesicles. What are these vesicles? They're really small vesicles. What these guys do is they isolate material that may be harmful or a threat to the cell. Okay, they contain waste products. They help to maintain the pH. And they export unwanted substances from the cell. So remember the lysosomes, right? The lysosomes are going to come by and they're going to eat that cell. Well, these vacuoles are going to absorb the waste from the lysosomes. So they work pretty close with lysosomes. The mitochondria. Every stinking biology class that you're ever going to take, you're always going to hear about the powerhouse of the cell. And that's what they do. Powerhouse of the cell. The mitochondria works and uses ATP. You heard about ATP in EMT school, and we know that's just pure energy, man. And that's what your cell uses to do certain things it needs energy for. You don't have to know, the anatomy and physiology of the mitochondria itself. Just know where, know where it is, know what the function of it is. All right, so here's your peroxisomes. Okay, so they're like peroxide. Okay, so they house enzymes that catalyze. So when you catalyze something, meaning in a chemical reaction, if you add a catalyst to it, it makes the reaction go faster. And so it houses these enzymes that do just that. They break down hydrogen peroxide and fatty acids and alcohol detox. So again, probably best found in the liver. And this is your actin filaments. And I like this slide because it tells you basically what the function of everything is. But if you can imagine, all right, so here's your actin filaments right here, right? But man, I love this pen. All right, so right here, but if 1 second. But if I was to peel this back, man, and throw this computer out the window. No, I'm just kidding. But no, if I was to peel this layer back, right, and you went deep into this cell, you would see that you would have these filaments, right? And what they're doing is they're running along like this. And they help with cellular structure. They help with cell movement. They help with contractions and that sort of thing. So that's what they do. And it's just another picture, right, of the cell itself, showing you functions, just giving you several pictures to look at. All right, so now we're going to get into the cell a little bit more. Told you we're going to talk about the cell dividing, right, and doing, and because it has to do it if life is we can't make it with just one cell. So it requires thousands of these guys working as a single unit to maintain that homeostasis. Let's talk about the nucleus. So the nucleus is the control center for that cellular process. Okay, it surrounding the nuclear envelope is nuclear pores. I don't care if you know about either one of those. Controls chemical communications between the cytoplasm and the nucleus. So what happens is the DNA inside this cell will decide what type it's going to be. That's pretty cool. So the DNA is in there, right? And so the DNA in that nucleus stores the instructions for protein synthesis. Okay, so for the making of new proteins. All right, and that DNA is going to coil around molecules. Okay, so the DNA, what ends up in the beginning, it's kind of like that, which is chromatin. Okay, that's what the DNA starts to look like. But the cell's pretty smart. It knows it's limited in size, so it needs to package this DNA nice and neat, and so it continues to coil very tightly, especially when it's getting ready to divide. It just continues to coil and coil and coil till you get a chromosome. Okay. All right. And so there's the protein right there that it was coiled around. And it just continued to coil and coil and coil. And that's what these guys are in here. They're chromosomes. So, we're going to talk about now how this thing's going to divide. So, the division of a single cell produces a pair of daughter cells. Okay, so it gets time for this cell to divide, and the body just knows when to do that. When it gets a certain size, it says it's time for me to divide. And so what you'll notice is that these two cells are 1/2 the size of the original cell. So we're going to make 2 cells out of that 1 cell. So these, eventually that's going to just split right down the middle. And then you're going to have these 2 daughter cells, which will have the exact DNA of this 1 cell. And that's why you need RNA. RNA to help make a carbon copy of the original DNA. And that's what happens. So these guys break off into 2 daughter cells. Now, these cells will do the same thing. They will grow like this one, and it will be time to divide again. And there's a process with that. And it's deep. But I took as much deepness as I could out of this. Okay. So you'll see right here in mitosis. Okay. So in mitosis, cell division begins with mitosis. Okay, so the identical copies of the original chromosomes are distributed to each daughter cell. So just like I mentioned before, right? Then you have cytokinesis. And with cytokinesis, the cell division ends at cytokinesis. All right. The division of the cytoplasm physically separates the 2 daughter cells. That's when, remember I said they're going to split right down the middle. So that is cytokinesis. And then the interphase. Interphase is when this cell is doing exactly what it's supposed to do, performing its normal functions, but it's not actively dividing. It's working on it. So you don't see any chromosomes in here. But they're going to keep wrapping tightly around that protein, right? They're going to keep wrapping and wrapping and wrapping until they develop the chromosomes. And once those chromosomes are developed, they will go through the same process again of mitosis. And then you have differentiation. And that's just what I talked about earlier. I talked about the process of a gradual specialization, meaning what type of cells are we going to have? So it's going to find out. It's going to go through that process. Do we have, cardiac? Do we have smooth? Cardiac. Maybe we have muscle, tissue. Now, just to name a few. Could keep going. Whoops. But that's what differentiation means. Okay, so remember, now we're going to talk about, I went a little backwards, but I wanted to get the cell out of the way. Now we can talk about the cell membrane. So we have a lipid bilayer. Cell membrane proteins, right? And so what it does is it channels protein, so it's gated, only opening at certain times for certain proteins, right? And so we have the channel proteins, and all of these guys live on top, right? So all these guys live on top, like the ion channel, right? So that's for positively charged ions to come through, right? And so you see right up here, that channel especially for them. There's the carrier. And so what happens with the carrier is that it has to, whatever wants to get in here, has to first attach itself into this cell and then be carried in to the cell. And then here's your enzyme. So the cool thing about the enzyme is it's going to come and it has a special place to land on the cell. And if it's the right enzyme, it opens up this gate like this one. But it won't open up for just any enzyme. And then these are called cell identifier markers, the MHC protein right here. And then it can identify whether that's your cell or not, or somebody else's. And it's not going to open up anything then, because it's selective. So again, it's a physical barrier. It separates the inside of the cell from the surrounding extracellular fluid. So everything out here is extracellular. Then you have your membrane. These guys, you know why they call it a lipid bilayer? It's because two different sets of lipids here. There's one, here's two, and that's what separates the extracellular fluid from inside the intracellular fluid. So it controls the entry, like I said, the entry of ions, and then certain nutrients. We learned about glucose, right? We got to have glucose in the cell to greet oxygen. So that's where that comes from. It's going to open up some channels to be able to get rid of waste, because there's waste products like CO2 that it's going to need to get out. And also, remember we talked about the ribosomes, right? Secreting proteins. Well, that may be for other cells. And so what's made in here sometimes needs to come out. And so that's how it's designed to work. So again, the plasma membranes, it's extremely thin though, and it's very delicate. And I mentioned it's called phospholipid bilayer because the different phospholipid molecules. Okay, so you had the hydrophilic, okay, and then these guys are called hydrophobic tails. So I want you to think about that. So hydrophilic, and philic means love. So it loves water, hydro being water. So it's perfectly fine with being out here and facing this extracellular fluid. No problem. It loves it. But we have hydro meaning water and phobic meaning fear. It has a fear of water. It doesn't like it. And that's these tails. And that's why they're inside here. And they're not around the extracellular or intracellular fluid. All right. And I'm sorry, this is cholesterol. That's where cholesterol is formed, and it's no big deal. You know, that's how it happens. Okay, so a lot of information. I'm going to go ahead and open up the chapter. I'm going to put this video lecture on. I'll follow up within the next few days with some more information, another video lecture. I'm thinking probably 2 or 3 more video lectures for this chapter. All right. Look forward to hearing from you. I'll probably assign another discussion board topic. I'm thinking of one now. I did enjoy everybody's discussion topics. I really did. And even some of you that I replied to, you may think, man, he's being an ass. I really wasn't being an ass at all. Sometimes it's hard responding because you can't respond with tone of voice. Sometimes you read tone of voice into something and it doesn't sound friendly, or it doesn't sound exactly right. But I did. I enjoyed the topic. I enjoyed the responses I saw. I wish I could have responded to each and every one of them. But I just don't have time to respond to all of them. But I do read all of them. And so I did enjoy those. And so